Hi, I'm Ronnie West,
And I'm Jeremy, or Dr. J.
and this is Good Parents, Good Children.
Just because you're not a bad parent doesn't mean you're not bad at parenting.
We decided that we would like to talk about why people should bother becoming parents. So let's say you're in your 20s or 30s, and it seems like it's the time to consider this, or you know people that are your age or maybe a little bit older that are thinking about it. So why should you bother becoming a parent? What do you get out of it? What's the point of parenthood?
Sure. And we were thinking about in previous generations, there really wasn't a question, right? Like everybody had children. They fairly well had children young, but our age of marriage and age of first child keeps increasing. So age of marriage is now 27 and age of first child is now 27. And I always remembered people would cite the statistic of 2.4 children, right? Everybody had 2.4 children. I checked this year and it became 1.8, right? So the average American household now doesn't even have two children.
Right. So the number of people, the people that are in America right now, on average, won't even sustain their own population, which has economic ramifications, but that's not the purpose of this video. But it is a significant shift that various societies, this last time I heard this is going on in Japan, various European societies, I mean, it's all over the world in wealthy societies, that the tendency to have less than two children, so not even sustaining yourself. So that's one of the reasons why we want to talk about this, is because since the question of why should you become a parent wasn't even as important before, now it seems like if, I guess I'd put it this way, if becoming a parent is really valuable, if it deserves a sales pitch, or if we want more people to do it, I mean, if that is the case, then maybe we should talk about what the point is, or think about what are the advantages of becoming a parent.
Parenting provides great joy in life, and it's an opportunity to be more virtuous and to develop virtuous and competent adults.
Three major things right there. Like, it's just fun, which is, a nice, clearly selfish, not in a negative way, but just like self-interested. It is fun is one argument that we might make, and I think it is very fair. And then it can encourage you to become more valuable and have purpose and become more virtuous, for you to become a better person in a very real way, especially if you pursue what we think is important, and that is training and producing young people, children that will become virtuous and useful adults, helpful, better people, good people, adults.
So it's now become necessary to make a positive case for parenting or for having children, where before it was just what people did. But I think to even be more honest to the question, we almost have to upfront. So why isn't this obvious anymore? Why isn't it just what everybody's doing?
Well, I think one reason why it's not obvious is all three of those things that we proposed are under question. I think, there's a lot of jokes about how difficult parenting is, and then comedians will complain about how hard parenting is, and people will just make jokes about, oh, it's difficult and it's hard. And that sounds almost like the honest side to me. And then there will be like this trite, but I really love them. And then that stuff, sometimes, at least in entertainment and whatnot, that comes off as this sort of flippant, well, I have to say this. Or to me, it almost seems like people look at how parents love children, and it's treated like this sort of insincere, like you have to love them, and it's built into you biologically. So since it's this, like, loving your children is thrust upon you, or you have no choice but to love them, it's like that reduces its value somehow. Maybe I'm misreading it, but that's what it seems like is one element.
Well, if I listen to people who have children later in life, or fewer kids, let's say fewer than three, or who decide not to have children at all, I mean, a lot of times they talk about lives of travel or decision, or just taking the perspective that, oh, when and if I have children, then here's so much that I'm not going to be able to do anymore, or I won't be able to pursue my goals, or even it's just not values aligned.
Well, so if somebody, I mean, if you don't have kids, then you do have like you save enough money. So like a middle-class person doesn't have children. They save a bunch of money. They save a bunch of time. They will have more money and time to spend on other things. There's an opportunity cost to having children. So you could replace children with doing other stuff. And I think the other stuff people look at often will be things like travel the world, focus on my career. So yeah, if you don't have kids, you don't have to worry about parental leave, being gone for a period of time. You don't have to make the decision, is one of the parents going to stay home and then their career is going to suffer. You don't have to spend the money on them, drive them to whatever child daycare stuff you've got going on, miss work because you're sick. I mean, it's going to make, you can put more time and effort into your career if you don't have kids. That is accurate.
Do you think this has anything to do with people marrying at later ages as well?
I absolutely think that that's going to factor in. I think that people, whether they would say this overtly or not, there's some pushback in our society about what the ideal family looks like. But I think everybody realizes it's a whole lot easier to raise kids when you've got two parents, you've got the traditional husband and wife raising the kids. There's something ideal about that historically. And I think that people understand that often. So people, generally speaking, wait to have kids until they're older. Now, there's other situations where you can raise kids effectively, but it seems like there's major advantages to that. So, and I think people realize that.
So have we been fully honest in saying why don't people have kids? I mean, I had
there's another piece. I mean, people think about overpopulation, right? Which to me, I'm like, that to me feels a little bit overly intellectual, maybe, or abstracted. It's hard for me to imagine that that's the real reason, perhaps, but maybe I'm just maybe I'm not being fair to that argument. But I mean, it's an argument people make. They say the world's overpopulated, so not having that's a way to talk about the not having kids, where a person can feel like they're doing something valuable for other people by not having kids.
Well, that's fair, but that's only with respect to having biological children. Right. First of all, I don't think it follows. Rarely does the individual behavior, especially a virtuous behavior like raising children, impact the sociology as a whole. But if we're opening this to adoption, then actually having children can solve the problem. If you believe overpopulation is an issue, right? So it just doesn't carry.
I mean, whether when I was thinking of this video, I was thinking have your own children. But I mean, you do make a good point. It's like, if you're open to adoption, then you're solving problems as far as helping these kids out, and you're not increasing the overpopulation problem at all. So that does address part of that. But even if you're looking at having your own biological children, I don't think the overpopulation thing carries water. But we can talk about what the disadvantages to that argument. I mean, other people will just look at it and say, well, there's too much evil and suffering in the world. The world's too chaotic. I don't know what the future will hold for my child. They could end up having terrible diseases or depression, or what if they become awful and evil and do something really bad? Or awful and evil and bad things happen to them, and they suffer and things stink.
Although when you look at that particular argument, if you're being quite intellectual about it, then you really run a cost-benefit analysis, right? Like what's an overall better to introduce something innocent or potentially good into a world of evil, even if you want to take the position that most everything that exists is evil. I'm not sure that's necessarily a correct position, or is it actually better, especially inside the local or nuclear family, to say, oh, by having a child, I'm actually going to generate good and virtue and rightness.
Well, in that, I think that speaks to the virtues of hope and faith, which are interrelated. Of, do you trust you and the people that would be in your child's hypothetical life? So let's say, your parents, your spouse's parents, perhaps your friends, potential mentors, people in your community, everyone around you, and then you in particular as the parent or one of the parents. How much faith do you have in all of those people to be an influence on the child, so that child can become somebody who at bare minimum does more good to everyone around them than harm, right? So that they generate more wealth than they drain on the world and the people around them. They do more good for the people around them than harm. To me, that seems like a fairly low bar. You're able to make things better around you more than you make things worse around you. Therefore, your existence is it's better that you had existed. You think about It's a Wonderful Life, the iconic movie that then became a Christmas movie, where he wishes he was dead because of how badly things are going, one Christmas season. And then, in the story, the angel's like, oh, okay, well, let's see what the world would look like if you're never born. And then it's all these things that he did that were good. Well, George Bailey in the movie is awesome. Like, Jimmy Stewart's character did all these amazing things, and the people he helped did all these amazing things. So there's this huge impact. But you don't have to as a potential parent, you don't have to produce a bunch of George Baileys in order for it to have been worth it, in order for it to have been a good thing that you had kids. So I think we can't set the bar super high in order for the cost of entry to becoming a parent. I don't think you don't have to produce amazing people for it to have been a good decision for you to have kids. And I think that you need to trust that the people that you produce could be valuable and useful.
Now you're hitting up against one of my big points on this topic, which is I'm not sure the question is why have kids. That the question might actually be why become a parent, right? If the question is why have kids, then maybe I'm thinking about they're going to be fun. I'm going to have somebody to live with and share life with. Those are great and good things. But if I think why become a parent, then I'm actually thinking something about a change in me or something about an outcome for this kid when they're an adult. That's why become a parent. Well, maybe because I want to develop as a person and an adult, because I want the responsibility of bringing somebody else up, and to a certain degree, their outcome being determinate on me. Like as if why become a parent, some of that is a readiness to lead in your home. It's a really different question than why have kids.
Well, so I mean, obviously, I think the questions run parallel, and it's useful to think on both ends, because there's the shallow question, the deep question.
Sure.
There's the self-interested question in it's a shallow form of self-interest, and then there's a deeper, still form of self-interest in a sense, because it's useful to you to become, if you pursue parenthood and you become an actually good parent, then you've achieved something useful, and achieving useful things is one of the most enjoyable things you can do. Like, what feels better than having become more useful and more valuable as a person, where you can look and say, you know what, I'm actually better. I'm better than I was a few years ago. And you use the word responsibility, and that is really key, because I think people talk about finding meaning or purpose in their life. This might be an overstatement, but I think it's fair or close to fair to say you don't find meaning and purpose. There's several things that are good in life you don't find meaning and purpose from. Okay, like fun is good. It's nice to have fun. To the degree that it's different from fun, it's nice to be entertained. Like that's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with fun. There's nothing wrong with entertainment. They're important parts of life. But I don't think they provide meaning or purpose. right? You can have a lot of fun and a lot of entertainment and be depressed and feel terrible
Oh,
and
sure.
have this sense of being unruddered, having no rudder or direction in life. So
Mhm.
what gives you meaning and purpose? I think it's, generally speaking, it comes down to responsibility. I mean, in a practical sense, like what's
Yeah.
the practical element that can give you purpose and meaning in life? It's responsibility. For most people, I think for most people, they're not going to have any source of responsibility and therefore meaning and purpose that is better than parenthood, right? Like you
Mhm.
could look at some people who, the level of skill they have or the opportunities they have, a little bit of luck, whatever, they are able to get a whole lot done for themselves and others and divine a certain amount of meaning and purpose and
Mhm.
responsibility that's really magnificent. And whether they had kids or not, that's really impressive. So they're able to get a lot done without that, right?
Yeah.
But for most of us, parenthood is an amazing source of that, like really, really powerful.
Well, parenthood seems to be the one thing a person can choose to do to have the greatest impact on another person. Is
Yes.
effectively, if you make the decision to do that, you won't possibly have that same kind of opportunity to make that impact on somebody else as you can for your children. You know, you and I say that the purpose of parenting is to create virtuous and competent adults. It is. When I was working that question, one of the places that I came to was that a major purpose of parenting is to instill meaning in your children. So there's very much this dual road that's happening. And I get to do something that frankly I think is very hard, very challenging, very demanding, and the payout is so big. And in doing so, I get the chance to convince my son, my daughter, they ought to develop themselves and potentially even their children to get that payout that's so worth it.
Well, so you said, what did you say? You said it was demanding. What were some of the other words you used just now?
Challenging,
Challenging, demanding,
downright difficult, hard.
difficult, hard. Okay. When you do things that are challenging, demanding, difficult, and hard, and they're arbitrary, meaningless, and purposeless, that's torturous and terrible. But when you do something that's incredibly meaningful, and that very meaningful thing is those words describe it. In that scenario, I almost think that the meaningful thing, those aren't downsides to that activity that's meaningful. Because then when you're doing something meaningful voluntarily, you choose to do it and it's meaningful and it's valuable and it's impacting you in a positive way. And hopefully the people around you or whomever you're responsible for, right? And it's challenging and it's difficult and it's hard and all of those other things. Well, then that's increasing your competence and virtue. You're an example to the people around you of somebody who is pursuing something that is valuable but difficult. And it's not happening to you. It's not being thrust upon you. It's voluntary. You're choosing to accept that burden.
That voluntariness is the real key to the whole thing, I think. So sometimes we talk about how self-sacrifice can be virtuous. The reason it can be virtuous is if you're sacrificing self, it has to be in service of something that matters, right? Other people, and expressly those people in your close circle of influence, their outcome matters. And so it's as if I were putting in demand and challenge into things that are meaningless. Well, as you say, there's just no end point. But it's this idea of how far down the road can I possibly look and do things that are demanding and challenging and oftentimes stressful and unenjoyable today because it's going to make me actually better, actually gooder, right? More righteous. Make those around me, make my children actually better, actually more righteous. Then not only does it start to become worth it, but as you say, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's like the process that not just, okay, this eventual payout makes it okay that I'm being tortured today. It's like, no, this is the process by which I'm being refined.
Right, right. It's like you look at some inanimate object. I'm having a hard time thinking of what metaphor to use for an inanimate object, but you look at something that's put through the ringer for no reason. And so then all the scarring on it's symbolic of nothing, right? It's just a waste. But then you look at something that's put through the ringer for purpose. Well, then all of the scarring on that inanimate object, that's symbolic of all of the value that object has had over time. So, okay, so I just thought of like a saddle, right? So you think about like a cowboy or something, and they get all this work done. So they buy the saddle, it's new, it's a greenhorn cowboy, he's done nothing. Okay, then he's riding thousands of cattle from Texas to Kansas City or whatever, right? And then over time, and he loves the saddle. It's an inanimate object. He looks at the saddle. What does it mean? It means hard work, sacrifice. He went from a greenhorn to somebody who knew what he was doing. Maybe he mentored other people. Maybe he got, thousands of cattle safely on the job. It's a symbol of pride and value. Well, then all the scarring and the aging on the saddle, it's a feature, not a bug. Right.
You were speaking, and I realized I had experienced the converse, right? So this is someone who went through stress and wear for a purpose. And conversely, I had a job once upon a time that was easy. It was easy, and I got to spend time with babies and toddlers, so I really liked it. And whenever I left that job, and they were asking me why I was leaving, didn't I enjoy this work? And I really enjoyed it, but I wanted a challenge, right? It's like quit paying me so well and treating me so nicely if you're not gonna intellectually challenge me, right? These are some of the things that we secretly yearn for when we're honest, and if we don't have them, and we're unconscious to that, we'll end up seeking them out. Or I'll put it another way to bring us a little bit back to the topic at hand. If we find ourselves 40 or 45 and professionally successful, but living alone, that's a lot of time to be alone with your own thoughts. And oftentimes I find these people, because I interact with them at work and in society, and it seems like there's emptiness, like there's a missingness just kind of around them.
Well, so, there are people that choose to not have children, and then they pursue a life of incredible sacrifice for something that they have deemed as noble and valuable, right? So, I mean, I'm assuming Mother Teresa never had kids because she was a nun. So, but you look at somebody, and I'm not an expert on Mother Teresa, but my impression is she did all kinds of charitable, valuable things for a lot of people other than herself, and was able to find meaning in virtuous, loving, charitable activities, self-sacrifice, right? And people could do things like that on a much smaller scale, and it still be super duper worthwhile. Right? They're getting things done. You could have somebody who they start a business and they put all their eggs in that basket, but because of their hard work and sacrifice, working 80 hours a week and living on very little money and putting all the money back in the business over the course of time, on the one hand, yeah, they become more wealthy and they're able to do fun things with their money, when they're in their 50s or 60s or whatever, after a lot of time. But they're also hiring dozens or hundreds of people. Those people are able to support their families.
Sure. And
it's because of the sacrifices they made earlier. Well, if a person ends up believing that they've got things they want to do or can do, and they don't think that they could have children to get that stuff done, if the things they're pursuing are valuable enough, they're really not frivolous, they're really useful, truly meaningful, well, then that becomes a situation where maybe not having the kids is a good choice. Now, the problem is there's a lot of things in life where you could pull off a lot of that and still have kids. Having kids doesn't have to be out of line with those things necessarily. But sometimes it might. I mean, if the things that you're going to do there's just no way to do it without spending 100 hours, 100 hours a week away from home. Well, that's not the most conducive environment to parenthood. Or if you have to be in a really dangerous part of the world, then it may not be conducive to that. There could be people in the military who are just on active duty, gone, and they're making sacrifices that they've deemed really valuable, and they don't want to put their family through that. That sounds like a pretty good argument for a non-frivolous, valuable life. I can definitely see that.
So non-frivolous, valuable life, you're effectively setting the bar as intense self-sacrifice, sacrificial, sociological, beneficial, to the point that if there were children, they might as well be getting harmed. So you mentioned Mother Teresa, who spent her time finding people who were beaten up and tossed on the side of the road in Calcutta and taking them to the emergency room, right? It's no place for children.
Okay, and I would temper that a little bit. Let's say she just decided for her, she didn't, let's say she wasn't a nun, so having a family and having children was really on the table, and whatever.
Okay.
Well, if she just decided, I don't want to do this at the same time as have kids, because I think having children will distract me from this purpose that I want to really pursue. And even if it's not a matter of she can't, or she deems that it wouldn't be appropriate for the kids, just personal choice, I'm going to pursue this. And I think if I really put all my heart into this and I don't allow myself to be distracted by that, I could see that. That makes sense. Even then, where it's not necessarily damaging to the kids, they decide to really, really pursue that thing. Sort of single-mindedly or whatever, then, and the bar doesn't have to be that high. I'm just saying there is a high bar where obviously it could make sense. And then we just have to see how low can you make the bar and it still makes sense, kind of.
This is Good Parents, Good Children.
Studies show that half of parents are below average. By watching this show, you're automatically in the top half.